0347 hours. June 14, 1944. Apple orchard, 6 kilometers inland from Omaha Beach, Normandy. Private First Class Thomas Brennan crouched in darkness among branches he'd spent 9 hours weaving into patterns that would transform an innocent French apple grove into a mechanical trap capable of incapacitating 14 armed soldiers without firing a single shot. The branches, pliable summer growth bent and interlaced at precise heights, formed invisible lattices that would clothesline running men at ankle and chest level, exploiting momentum and biomechanics to convert speed into incapacitation. If his theory was correct, the German patrol that had used this orchard shortcut for 3 consecutive nights would hit his branch traps at full sprint and go down like bowling pins. If he was wrong, he'd wasted an entire night playing with trees while the German squad passed through unmolested, and his lieutenant would have legitimate cause to question his tactical judgment. But Brennan knew he wasn't wrong. He'd used identical techniques to manage deer populations in his family's Iowa orchard for 8 years before the draft notice arrived. He understood how animals, including human animals, responded when familiar paths suddenly contained invisible obstacles at heights that couldn't be detected until momentum made avoidance impossible. 30 yards behind him, concealed in a drainage ditch, Sergeant William Kozak and 6 riflemen waited as backup force, positioned to engage if Brennan's branch trap failed and the German patrol had to be eliminated through conventional means. Kozak had made his skepticism explicit during the mission briefing 12 hours earlier. You want to catch Germans using woven branches. Like you're trapping rabbits. Deer actually, Brennan had corrected. Rabbits are too small for branch lattice techniques. But yes, essentially the same principle. The Germans are using this orchard as a shortcut between their forward observation post and their main line. They move fast through the trees because they think they're in safe territory. Fast movement through invisible obstacles equals incapacitation. Lieutenant Morrison, platoon leader, 23 years old, West Point educated, had studied the topographic map showing the orchard location, then studied Brennan with expression suggesting he was attempting to determine whether his private had lost his mind. Standard doctrine for enemy patrol interdiction is ambush with overwhelming firepower. We set up a kill zone, wait for them to enter, eliminate the patrol. Clean, effective, proven methodology. Yes, sir. But that methodology has 3 problems in this situation. First, the orchard is only 400 yards from German main positions. Gunfire will alert them that we're operating in this sector. Second, a firefight might wound prisoners before we can extract intelligence. Dead Germans don't tell us about defensive positions or upcoming operations. Third, the German patrol is 14 men. We're 8. Even with ambush advantage, a firefight risks casualties on our side. Morrison had been quiet for a moment. And your branch trap solves these problems how? Silent capture, sir. The branches will tangle and incapacitate them through mechanical restraint. No gunfire to alert nearby positions. Prisoners captured uninjured and disoriented. Ideal conditions for intelligence extraction. And 0 risk to our personnel because we're not in direct confrontation. This technique works? You've done this before? On deer, sir. For 8 years on my family's orchard in Iowa. We had significant deer damage problems. Herds would move through at dawn and dusk, destroying fruit trees and crops. Commercial fencing was expensive and required constant maintenance. My father developed a technique using the orchard's own branches, woven into barriers at heights deer couldn't detect until they were already entangled. Reduced our deer damage by 90%. Germans aren't deer, Private Brennan. No, sir. But the biomechanics are similar. Fast-moving creatures hitting invisible obstacles at leg and torso height. The physics work the same way regardless of species. Momentum carries them forward into the obstruction. Entanglement prevents recovery. Disorientation creates compliance. Sergeant Kozak had interjected, even if the branches somehow stop them, they're armed soldiers. They'll shoot their way out. Not if they're tangled properly, Sergeant. The branch lattices are designed to wrap arms and weapons. By the time they realize what's happened, they'll be immobilized. We move in immediately, disarm them while they're still processing the situation. The psychological shock of being defeated by trees, that creates compliance better than threats. Morrison had studied the map again, then made his decision. You have tonight to set your trap. We'll position backup force to engage if your technique fails. But understand, if this doesn't work, we're falling back to standard ambush protocols. And you're going to face questions about why you spent a night weaving branches instead of preparing proper defensive positions. Understood, sir. That had been 13 hours ago. Brennan had entered the orchard at 1830 hours, while enough daylight remained to study the terrain and branch structure. The orchard was old, probably 50 years minimum, with mature apple trees whose lower branches had been neglected by owners more concerned with survival under German occupation than with proper pruning. That neglect was tactically advantageous. The unpruned branches created dense growth at heights between 2 and 6 feet, perfect for Brennan's purposes. He'd spent the first hour mapping the German patrol's movement pattern by studying disturbed grass and broken twigs. The patrol used a consistent route, entering the orchard at the northeastern corner, moving diagonally southwest through 3 rows of trees, exiting at the southern edge. Total distance, approximately 180 yards. Movement speed, rapid. They were clearly treating the orchard as safe space where speed mattered more than caution. That speed would be their downfall. Brennan had begun weaving at 1945 hours, working methodically through twilight and into darkness, using techniques his father had taught him during long Iowa evenings when deer management was practical necessity rather than military tactic. The technique required understanding tree biology and animal behavior simultaneously. Apple branches, particularly summer growth, were pliable enough to bend without breaking, strong enough to restrain significant force, and numerous enough to create dense barriers when properly interlaced. Brennan had started with the ankle-height traps, branches between 18 and 24 inches above ground, woven horizontally across the patrol route in overlapping patterns that created a lattice approximately 6 feet deep. The spacing was critical, gaps large enough that casual observation revealed nothing unusual, but dense enough that a running foot would inevitably strike multiple branches simultaneously. The physics were straightforward. A soldier running at normal patrol speed, approximately 6 miles per hour, would cover 1 foot in roughly 1/10 of a second. When his leading foot struck the branch lattice at ankle height, his momentum would carry his torso forward while his leg was arrested. Basic biomechanics. He'd pitch forward, hands reaching reflexively to break his fall. That's when the chest-height traps would engage. Brennan had positioned these at 48 to 54 inches above ground, precisely at torso height for falling men. The chest traps were more complex than the ankle lattices, branches woven in 3-dimensional patterns that created pockets designed to catch arms, weapons, and equipment. When a soldier fell forward into these traps, his arms would penetrate into the lattice, his momentum would drive him deeper into the branches, and the spring tension of bent wood would close around him like a cage. He'd created 6 sequential trap zones across the 180-yard patrol route. Each zone was approximately 30 feet deep, positioned to ensure that soldiers falling into one zone would pile into the next zone when following soldiers couldn't stop in time. The entire system was invisible in darkness. Even in daylight, casual observation would reveal only slightly denser branch growth than normal, nothing that suggested hostile intent or tactical manipulation. Brennan had finished the last trap zone at 0230 hours, then withdrew to his observation position 20 yards east of the route. For the past hour he'd waited, listening to night sounds, watching for the movement patterns that would announce the German patrol's approach. At 0342 hours, he'd heard them. Boot sounds on dirt path beyond the orchard's northern edge, low German voices discussing something in tones he couldn't understand, the metallic sounds of equipment being adjusted before movement. The patrol was coming. Brennan had clicked his signal device twice, a mechanical cricket that made soft snapping sound. 30 yards behind him, Sergeant Kozak would have heard the signal and alerted the backup force. Enemy approaching, prepare for potential engagement. Now, at 0347 hours, Brennan watched 14 German soldiers enter the orchard's northeastern corner and begin their diagonal movement through the trees. They moved fast, not running but walking with the purposeful speed of men who wanted to minimize exposure time while crossing open space. Their spacing was professional, approximately 5 yards between soldiers, staggered formation that prevented bunching, weapons held at low ready. Under normal circumstances, they'd cross the 180 yards in roughly 90 seconds. Under Brennan's circumstances, they'd travel approximately 40 yards before everything changed. The lead soldier, a sergeant based on the insignia visible in starlight, approached the first trap zone. His pace was steady, confident, attention focused forward on the exit point rather than downward on the ground. His right foot struck the ankle lattice at 0348 hours and 6 seconds. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. His foot caught between 2 woven branches, his momentum carried his torso forward, and he pitched face first toward the ground with the distinctive forward rotation of a man whose base has been swept. He never reached the ground. His fall trajectory drove him directly into the chest-height lattice, which caught him across the torso like a baseball glove catching a line drive. The spring tension of bent branches closed around his arms and weapon, immobilizing him in a cocoon of wood. The soldier behind him, approximately 5 yards back, had 1 second to process what he was seeing before his own foot hit the lattice. He went down identically: ankle trap, forward pitch, chest trap engagement, immobilization. The third soldier tried to stop. Got his feet tangled in branches the second soldier had disturbed during his fall. Went down sideways into the lattice, which was equally effective regardless of entry angle. The 4th through 8th soldiers hit the trap zones in rapid sequence. None had time to avoid obstacles they couldn't see until impact. They fell like dominoes, each collision disturbing more branches that entangled subsequent soldiers. The 9th soldier actually saw the trap. Shouted warning in German. Tried to reverse direction. Backed into the 10th soldier, who was still moving forward at speed. Both went down in tangled collision that drove them into a trap zone they'd been trying to avoid. Soldiers 11 through 14 managed to stop before hitting the traps. For approximately 3 seconds they stood frozen, weapons raised, staring at 10 comrades wrapped in apple branches like insects in spider webs. Then Sergeant Kozak and 6 American riflemen emerged from the drainage ditch, weapons trained, voices shouting commands in English that the Germans probably didn't understand but whose meaning was unmistakable: surrender or die. The standing Germans dropped their weapons immediately. The tangled Germans struggled briefly, then ceased resistance when they realized that struggling only tightened the branch lattices around their bodies. Total engagement time: 32 seconds from first contact to complete surrender. Casualties: 0 on both sides. Shots fired: 0. Prisoners captured: 14. Brennan emerged from his observation position and approached the trap zones, studying his handiwork with the satisfaction of a craftsman whose design had performed exactly as calculated. The branch lattices had held perfectly, not a single soldier had torn free, not one trap had failed mechanically. Lieutenant Morrison arrived 2 minutes later, face showing the expression of an officer attempting to reconcile what he'd observed with what military doctrine suggested should have been possible. You caught 14 armed German soldiers using woven apple branches. Yes, sir. Without firing a shot. Yes, sir. That's... Morrison paused, searching for appropriate words. That's the strangest successful tactical action I've witnessed in this entire war. It's just deer fencing, sir. Same principles, different application. The immediate task was securing the prisoners before nearby German positions realized something was wrong. Sergeant Kozak's team moved efficiently, cutting the tangled soldiers free from the branch lattices using trench knives, binding their hands with field-expedient restraints, searching them for weapons and intelligence materials. The Germans were compliant, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and pragmatic recognition that resistance would be suicidal. Several were injured: bruised faces from impact with branches, strained muscles from the sudden arrests of momentum, minor lacerations from sharp twigs. None required immediate medical treatment. All were conscious and mobile once freed from the branches. The German sergeant, the first soldier who'd hit the trap, stared at Brennan with expression mixing respect and disbelief. Bomb fall, he said in accented English. Tree trap. Very intelligent. Brennan nodded acknowledgement. Apple orchard management technique. Adapted for military application. In Wehrmacht we use mines, wire, machine guns. Not trees. The German smiled grimly. Perhaps we should learn your farming methods. By 04:15 hours, all 14 prisoners had been secured and moved to a temporary holding position 300 yards west of the orchard. Lieutenant Morrison had radioed battalion headquarters reporting the capture and requesting intelligence personnel for immediate interrogation. Captain James Whitmore, Battalion S2 intelligence officer, arrived at 04:45 hours with 2 German-speaking interrogators and keen interest in how 14 enemy soldiers had been captured without gunfire in territory where combat typically meant casualties on both sides. Morrison explained the operation while Whitmore listened with increasing fascination. Branch traps. Using orchard vegetation as a non-lethal capture mechanism. Whitmore studied Brennan. That's innovative in ways that military doctrine doesn't address. Where'd you learn this technique? Family orchard in Iowa, sir. We use similar methods for deer management. The principles translate to human targets when you account for size and strength differences. Can this be repeated? Or was this a unique situation? Any environment with suitable vegetation and predictable enemy movement patterns would work, sir. Orchards, forests, hedgerow country, anywhere with branches at appropriate heights that can be manipulated without obvious visual change. The technique requires time for preparation and knowledge of enemy routes, but when those factors align, it's highly effective. Whitmore made notes, then turned his attention to the prisoners. The interrogation began immediately, conducted in a field setting without the formality of rear area facilities but with professional technique that exploited the prisoners' disorientation. The German sergeant provided basic tactical information: unit designation, 2 Battalion, 352nd Infantry Division, mission, patrol and reconnaissance of American forward positions, defensive layout in the immediate sector. Standard information that confirmed intelligence already obtained through other sources. But the real intelligence windfall came from the patrol's junior officer, a 22-year-old lieutenant named Klaus Weber who'd been the 8th soldier caught in Brennan's trap and who was sufficiently rattled by the bizarre capture that his operational security discipline deteriorated under Whitmore's methodical questioning. "Your patrol route," Whitmore said through his interpreter. "You've used this orchard for 3 nights. Why this specific path?" Weber hesitated, then answered, probably calculating that route information was already compromised since Americans had obviously been observing the pattern. "It's the fastest route between our observation post and the main defensive line. And it's covered from American observation by the trees. We thought it was safe." "Safe from what, specifically?" "From your artillery spotters. We have a..." Weber paused, recognizing he was approaching sensitive information. "You have a what, Lieutenant?" Weber's resistance collapsed, combination of shock, exhaustion, and the psychological effect of having been defeated by trees. "We have an 88mm battery positioned 800 meters northeast of here. Carefully camouflaged. Your aerial reconnaissance hasn't spotted it. The battery has destroyed 11 of your tanks in the past 6 days. We use the orchard route because it allows rapid communication between the battery's forward observer post and the gun position without exposure to your sight lines." The interpreter translated. Whitmore's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with the recognition of high-value intelligence. "This 88mm battery. You can show me its exact location on a map?" Weber nodded slowly, the compliance of a soldier who'd already crossed the line from prisoner to informant and saw no benefit in partial cooperation. 20 minutes later, Whitmore had precise coordinates for the concealed 88mm battery, map reference confirmed by Weber with detail that included camouflage positions, ammunition storage locations, crew size and firing sectors. The intelligence was actionable immediately. Whitmore radioed the coordinates to division artillery at 0520 hours. By 0545 hours, a 3-battery fire mission was prepared, 36 105mm howitzers targeting the German 88mm position with time-on-target strike designed to achieve simultaneous impact. The fire mission executed at 0612 hours. From Allied positions, soldiers could see the explosions, orange flashes and gray dawn light, followed by secondary detonations that indicated ammunition storage had been hit. Forward observers confirmed. The 88mm battery was destroyed. 3 guns disabled, ammunition stockpile detonated, crew casualties estimated at 80%. The battery that had destroyed 11 Allied tanks and killed dozens of American tankers no longer existed. And the intelligence that enabled its destruction had come from a German officer captured alive through a technique involving woven apple branches. By 0700 hours, the 14 prisoners had been transferred to rear area POW facilities for formal processing. Lieutenant Morrison gathered his platoon for after-action assessment. Private Brennan's technique achieved results that conventional ambush methodology probably wouldn't have matched, Morrison said. "If we'd used standard tactics, set up a kill zone engaged with rifles and grenades, we would have eliminated the patrol but likely killed or severely wounded all prisoners. Dead soldiers don't provide intelligence about hidden artillery batteries. Brennan's approach captured them intact and disoriented, creating conditions where valuable intelligence was extracted. That intelligence directly led to destruction of an enemy asset that was killing our tankers." He paused, looking at Brennan directly. "Outstanding work, Private. Genuinely exceptional tactical thinking." The platoon's response was muted but genuine. Soldiers who'd watched Brennan spend a night playing with trees and then witnessed 14 Germans captured without a shot, followed by artillery strike that eliminated a threat they'd been suffering under for days. Corporal Davies, a tank crewman who'd been temporarily attached to infantry after his Sherman was destroyed, approached Brennan after the formation. "That 88 killed my tank commander 6 days ago. 3 other guys from my battalion dead because of that gun position. You got it destroyed by catching Germans with branches." Davies extended his hand. I don't know whether to call you a genius or a farmer, but thank you. Just a farmer, Brennan replied, shaking the offered hand. Who happen to know how trees work. News of the orchard capture spread through battalion within hours, then through regiment and division over the following days. The story had elements that resonated with combat soldiers. A private using farm knowledge to outsmart German professionals, a bloodless capture that produced major intelligence, and the satisfying image of Wehrmacht soldiers tangled in trees like cartoon characters. But beyond the novelty, military intelligence and tactical planning officers recognized something significant. The technique represented a category of non-lethal capture methodology that had applications beyond Brennan's specific apple orchard situation. On June 17, 3 days after the capture, Captain Whitmore convened a meeting at battalion headquarters attended by intelligence personnel, reconnaissance specialists, and officers responsible for tactical innovation. Brennan was summoned to explain his technique in detail. The fundamental principle, Brennan explained to the assembled officers, is exploiting familiar terrain against enemy movement patterns. The Germans weren't careless. They'd used that orchard route successfully for multiple nights. It seemed safe because it was familiar. The branch traps worked because they were invisible until contact, and because running soldiers can't avoid obstacles their momentum has already committed them to hitting. Major Robert Hastings, Division G2 intelligence officer, asked the critical question. Can this be systematized? Taught to other units? Or was this a unique situation that worked once through specific circumstances? It can be systematized, sir, but it requires 3 conditions. First, suitable vegetation, branches or vines at appropriate heights that can be manipulated without obvious change. Second, predictable enemy movement through that vegetation. Third, personnel who understand plant manipulation and biomechanics well enough to design effective traps. Rural soldiers, farmers, orchardists, foresters, they'd have the baseline knowledge. Urban soldiers would need training. Time requirement? For this specific trap I needed 9 hours. That included observation, planning, and physical construction. With experience the time could be reduced. And multiple personnel working simultaneously could accelerate preparation. And the intelligence value? How critical was it that prisoners were captured alive rather than killed? Captain Whitmore answered that question. Without the live capture, specifically without capturing the German officer in a disoriented state where his security discipline failed, we wouldn't have obtained the 88mm battery location. That intelligence directly resulted in destruction of an asset that had killed American tankers for 6 days. The non-lethal capture was strategically more valuable than elimination would have been. Major Hastings made extensive notes. I'm recommending that Division create a technical advisory notice on environmental capture techniques. Not as formal doctrine, this is too situational for that, but as a tactical option that certain units in certain circumstances might employ. The technical advisory notice was distributed on June 22, 1944. Subject: non-lethal environmental capture techniques. Recent operations demonstrated viability of using manipulated vegetation to create mechanical restraint systems for enemy capture. Technique employed natural apple orchard branches woven into lattice patterns at ankle and chest height, resulting in incapacitation and capture of 14-man enemy patrol without casualties or weapon discharge. Advantages: silent operation, 0 friendly casualties, intact prisoner capture enabling high-value intelligence extraction, minimal resource requirement, adaptable to various terrain types. Limitations: requires suitable vegetation, predictable enemy movement patterns, significant preparation time, personnel with specialized knowledge of plant manipulation. Recommendation: units operating in vegetated terrain with observed enemy movement patterns should consider non-lethal capture techniques when intelligence value of intact prisoners exceeds value of enemy elimination. Rural background personnel, agricultural, forestry, should be identified as resources for technique development and implementation. The advisory reached units throughout the European theater. Response was mixed. Some commanders embraced the concept, others dismissed it as impractical novelty unsuitable for serious warfare. But several units experimented with variations. In July 1944, a reconnaissance platoon in the Bocage country used hedgerow vine weaving to create similar traps, capturing 6-man German patrol and obtaining intelligence on minefield locations. In August 1944, a ranger unit in southern France employed grapevine lattices to capture 4 German soldiers during vineyard operation, gaining information about defensive positions that enabled bloodless village liberation. In September 1944, A forest operation in the Hurtgen used fallen tree manipulation to create barriers that channeled German patrol into capture zone, resulting in 9 prisoners and intelligence about upcoming counterattack. The technique never became mainstream doctrine. It was too dependent on specific circumstances, required too much specialized knowledge, and didn't fit the military's preference for standardized procedures that any unit could employ. But it occupied a niche, a tactical option for situations where live capture provided greater strategic value than elimination. Brennan himself never used the technique again. After the Normandy campaign, his unit moved into urban combat environments where vegetation-based traps had no application. He fought through France, Belgium, and into Germany using conventional infantry tactics, earning Combat Infantryman Badge and Bronze Star for actions that had nothing to do with woven branches. He was wounded in March 1945 near the Rhine, shrapnel from an artillery shell that caught his squad during river crossing operations. The wounds were serious enough to remove him from frontline duty but not severe enough to require evacuation to the United States. He spent the war's final weeks at a field hospital in France, recovering while Germany collapsed. He was discharged in August 1945, returned to Iowa with his decorations, his scars, and memories of Normandy orchards that looked remarkably similar to the trees he'd grown up managing. His family's orchard had survived the war years through his father's management and his younger brother's labor. They welcomed him back without dramatics, the farm family way, acknowledgement without excess emotion, work as reintegration therapy, continuity as healing. Brennan returned to orchard management. The deer fencing techniques he'd used for military purposes returned to their original civilian application, protecting apple trees from wildlife damage. The branch weaving that had captured 14 German soldiers now captured nothing more threatening than white-tailed deer. He married in 1947, a woman named Margaret from a neighboring farm who understood that veterans sometimes needed silence more than conversation. They raised 4 children in the farmhouse where Brennan had grown up, teaching them orchard management, deer fencing techniques, and the practical knowledge that plants could be manipulated to solve problems if you understood their properties. He never spoke about the war in detail. His children knew he'd served in Europe, knew he'd been wounded, knew he'd received medals. But the specifics, the apple orchard, the woven branches, the captured Germans, remained unspoken for decades. His Bronze Star was displayed briefly in the living room, then quietly stored in a drawer when his oldest daughter needed the shelf space for school trophies. The medal's location was eventually forgotten, rediscovered during a house cleaning in 1978, then donated to a veterans museum in Des Moines. The story of the orchard capture survived in military circles through informal channels. Veterans who'd served in Normandy occasionally told the tale, usually embellished, sometimes distorted, but carrying the core truth. A farm kid had captured Germans using techniques learned from managing deer. In 1984, a military historian researching unconventional tactics in World War II discovered references to the incident in after-action reports and tracked down Brennan through Veterans Administration records. The historian, a professor at Iowa State University named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, interviewed Brennan for 4 hours, documenting the technique with academic precision. "You created a capture system using principles from wildlife management," Mitchell said during the interview. "That's a category of tactical innovation that military doctrine barely acknowledges. How did you know it would work on humans?" "The biomechanics are universal," Brennan replied. "Whether it's a deer or a soldier, if something moving fast hits an unexpected obstacle at leg height, physics determines what happens next. They fall forward. If there's something to catch them at chest height, they become entangled. The specific organism doesn't matter, the physics work the same way. But you were risking your credibility. If the technique had failed, you'd have faced serious criticism for wasting time on experimental methods instead of using proven tactics." True. But proven tactics had problems in that situation. A firefight would have alerted German positions, probably killed most of the patrol, and eliminated the intelligence value. The branch trap risked embarrassment if it failed. A firefight risked lives whether it succeeded or failed. The calculation seemed clear. Did you use similar techniques later in the war? Never had the right conditions again. Urban combat doesn't offer vegetation suitable for branch weaving. And by the time we were in Germany, the tactical situation had changed. We were advancing rapidly, not sitting in positions where we could prepare elaborate traps. The orchard capture was unique timing and circumstances that aligned perfectly. Mitchell's interview was published in a military history journal in 1986, Agricultural Knowledge in Combat, The Normandy Orchard Capture of 1944. The article provided detailed analysis of Brennan's technique, including biomechanical calculations and strategic assessment of non-lethal capture's intelligence value. The article generated modest attention. A few veterans organizations invited Brennan to speak about his experience. The Des Moines Register ran a feature story, "Iowa Farmers' World War II Innovation Used Orchard Skills to Capture Germans Without Bloodshed." The story included a photograph of 73-year-old Brennan standing in his apple orchard, surrounded by the same type of trees he'd weaponized 42 years earlier in France. But mainstream attention faded quickly. The story was interesting but not dramatic enough for popular military history focused on heroic actions and major battles. Brennan returned to his preferred obscurity, returned to orchard work, returned to life defined by agricultural rhythms rather than military service. He retired from active orchard management in 1992 at age 79, passing the operation to his eldest son. He spent retirement doing consulting work for Iowa Agricultural Extension Services, teaching young farmers about deer management and integrated pest control, and maintaining the farmhouse where 5 generations of Brennans had lived. He died in 1998 at age 85, survived by Margaret, 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. His funeral was attended by family, neighbors, fellow farmers, and a handful of veterans who'd served with him in Normandy and remembered the private who'd captured Germans with woven branches. Lieutenant Morrison, now 91, retired from a 30-year Army career, attended the funeral. Despite advanced age, Morrison's memory of June 14, 1944, remained sharp. At the graveside, Morrison spoke briefly, "Tom Brennan taught me that sometimes the best military solution comes from civilian knowledge. He used farming skills to solve a combat problem that conventional tactics couldn't address effectively. He captured 14 enemy soldiers, prevented a firefight, and enabled intelligence collection that saved American lives. He did it by understanding trees better than he understood military doctrine. That's worth remembering and honoring." The obituary in the Des Moines Register noted Brennan's military service. Mr. Brennan served with distinction in the U.S. Army during World War II, participating in the Normandy invasion and subsequent European campaigns. He was awarded the Bronze Star and Combat Infantryman Badge for actions that demonstrated innovative tactical thinking and contributed to Allied operations. No specific mention of the orchard capture. No description of branch traps or non-lethal techniques. Just acknowledgement that he'd served, innovated, and contributed. The technique itself survives in military training materials as footnote in unconventional tactics curricula. Modern special operations courses occasionally reference the Normandy orchard capture as example of environmental manipulation for tactical advantage. The specific application, woven branch traps, has limited relevance in contemporary warfare, but the underlying principle endures. Understanding the environment and its properties can create advantages that weapons and technology cannot. Thomas Brennan understood apple orchards. He understood deer behavior and branch manipulation and the biomechanics of organisms moving through familiar spaces. For one night in Normandy, that understanding created a tactical solution that conventional military methodology never anticipated. 14 German soldiers were captured without a shot fired. An 88mm artillery battery that had killed American tankers was destroyed because one of those prisoners provided intelligence. And the tankers who survived because that battery was eliminated, they owed their lives to an Iowa farm kid who knew how to weave branches into invisible traps. The physics were simple. The application was brilliant. The recognition was minimal. That asymmetry defines much of warfare. Significant contributions from unexpected sources, acknowledged briefly if at all, remembered by those whose lives they affected but forgotten by broader history. The soldiers who didn't die in German artillery strikes after June 12, 1944, they were the beneficiaries of Brennan's innovation, whether they knew it or not. The tankers who advanced through territory that would have been defended by the 88mm battery, they survived because orchard management techniques had been adapted to warfare. Thomas Brennan captured Germans with apple branches. The technique was used once, perfectly, in circumstances that never quite repeated. But the lesson endures. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a gun or a bomb, but understanding how the natural world works and how that knowledge can be adapted to solve problems that conventional methodology cannot address. The branches have long since grown back. The orchard probably doesn't exist anymore. French agriculture has changed dramatically since 1944. But the innovation remains, preserved in military history, remembered by those who understand that tactical advantage sometimes comes from the most unlikely sources. A farm kid from Iowa used deer fencing techniques to capture enemy soldiers and save American lives. The military gave him a Bronze Star. History gave him a footnote. The men who survived gave him their gratitude. In the end, that's the measure that matters.